Let me see your ID right now. We've got strict rules against loitering around government buildings. What's in that folder? Looks like stolen property. Is there a problem, officer? I am an assistant United States attorney standing on public property. I don't care. You're going in cuffs. Officer.
What happens when an overzealous patrol officer, blinded by ego and desperate to fabricate an arrest, tries to intimidate a citizen who turns out to be a high-ranking federal prosecutor for the Department of Justice? Officer Jason Bradley thought he was dealing with an easy target he could bully into submission. He had no idea he was confronting David Vance, a senior federal prosecutor whose daily job involves trying complex federal cases and holding corrupt officials accountable. Bradley believed his badge gave him absolute authority to ignore constitutional rights, but he forgot one critical detail. The high-definition body camera strapped to his chest was recording every single second. It captured every threat, every unlawful command, and every word of a power trip that would ultimately shatter his career. This footage serves as an unyielding, objective witness to a disastrous confrontation where unchecked arrogance collided with absolute legal mastery. Before we dive into every frame of this unbelievable footage, drop a comment below letting us know where you are watching from today. And if you believe that no law enforcement officer is above the law, hit that subscribe button to support real accountability. It was 10 o'clock on a bright Tuesday morning in the heart of the downtown Federal Courthouse District. The sun was shining on clean stone buildings, and the sidewalks were busy with people going to work. Lawyers carrying heavy leather bags walked alongside office workers grabbing their morning coffee. The area felt calm, safe, and professional. Sitting on a wooden bench outside a small coffee shop was 42-year-old David Vance. Dressed in a sharp charcoal suit and polished black shoes, David looked like any successful professional heading into court. But he was not just any lawyer. David was a Senior Assistant United States attorney with 15 years of experience trying major cases for the federal government. He had spent his entire career studying federal laws, leading grand jury investigations, and trying tough cases in front of strict judges. He was known by his peers for his calm demeanor, sharp mind, and deep respect for the Constitution. On this particular morning, David had a few extra minutes before a big hearing. He was sitting quietly across the street from the federal building, waiting for his co-counsel to arrive with their final trial notes. A paper cup of black coffee sat beside him on the bench. In his hands, he held a thick legal folder containing a confidential federal indictment brief. He was reading through the pages carefully, taking notes in the margins with a silver pen. David was doing nothing wrong. He was enjoying the warm morning air, sitting on public property, and preparing to serve the public inside a courtroom. He was a law-abiding citizen doing his job in broad daylight. He had no way of knowing that a patrol car was turning the corner, driven by a young officer who was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. Cruising down the street was 25-year-old Officer Jason Bradley. Bradley was a junior officer who had been on the police force for just 2 years. Around his precinct, he was known for being overly aggressive during routine street stops. He liked to call his style proactive policing, but in reality, he had a fragile ego and loved showing off his authority. Just the week before, his shift sergeant had reprimanded him for turning minor encounters into dangerous arguments. Bradley was angry about the lecture and desperate to prove himself with a big arrest. As Bradley drove past the coffee shop, his eyes locked onto David sitting on the bench. Instead of seeing a professional quietly reading, Bradley's mind jumped to wild conclusions. He saw a black man in an expensive suit holding a thick stack of papers near a government building and decided something was wrong. Controlled by his own biases and eager for a win, Bradley assumed David was up to no good. He convinced himself that David was casing the courthouse or carrying stolen government documents. He did not see any crime happen, but he decided to make a stop anyway. Without warning, Bradley jerked his steering wheel, cut across 2 lanes of traffic, and slammed on his brakes at the curb. He flipped on his emergency lights, making a big scene on the quiet street. He popped his car door open and marched toward the bench with heavy steps, his hand resting aggressively near his holster. Before David could even finish reading his sentence, Bradley stepped directly into his personal space, standing over him to look intimidating. "Let me see your ID right now," Bradley demanded, his voice loud and harsh. He did not explain why he was stopping David. He did not state any legal reason or suspicion of a crime. He simply expected total submission. David slowly raised his eyes, lowered his pen, and looked back at the young officer with complete calm. The trap had been set, and Officer Bradley had no idea he was walking right into it. Officer Bradley standing over him did not intimidate David. He capped his pen, set his paper cup down, and looked directly into the officer's eyes. "Is there a problem, officer?" David asked, keeping his voice smooth and steady. "You tell me," Bradley snapped, crossing his arms. "We've got strict rules against loitering and trespassing around government buildings. And what is in that folder? It looks like stolen government property to me." The accusation was absurd. David was sitting on a public bench in broad daylight, but Bradley's ego was driving the stop, and he was determined to find a crime where none existed. David did not panic. Instead, he explained the law with simple, exact words. "Officer, under the legal standards set by Terry v. Ohio, you need reasonable, articulable suspicion that a crime has been committed, is being committed, or is about to be committed to detain me," David said calmly for the body camera record. "I am sitting on a public bench, reading a case file. That is not a crime."
Show me your identification right now. Officer, you need reasonable suspicion to detain me. I am reading a case file.
Don't cite court cases at me.
I am going to reach into my jacket pocket to show you my credentials. I am an Assistant United States Attorney.
Nice try. Anyone can buy a fake badge online and print a plastic card. On top of everything else,
Bradley did not lean in to read the name. He did not inspect the holographic seal. He pushed the credential folder away, completely dismissing the one piece of evidence that proved he was making a catastrophic mistake. His mind was made up, and his arrogance was about to push the situation past the point of no return. Before David could put his credentials back into his jacket, Officer Bradley lunged forward. He grabbed David's left arm with heavy force and yanked him off the wooden bench. David's paper coffee cup knocked over, spilling onto the sidewalk, while his legal files scattered across the bench. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back," Bradley yelled, twisting David's arm up toward his shoulder blades. Pain shot through David's arm, but he did not pull away or fight back. He knew any physical movement would give the officer an excuse to use even more violence. Instead, David remained completely calm and compliant under duress. "Officer Bradley, badge number 4102, David said clearly, looking straight into the lens of the body camera mounted on the officer's chest. "The time is 10:04 a.m. You are executing an arrest without probable cause. You are committing a federal felony under color of law. Keep talking and see how much worse this gets for you," Bradley snapped back, his voice dripping with arrogance. He pulled out his heavy steel handcuffs and ratcheted them around David's wrists. He squeezed them down tight, far tighter than necessary, pinching the skin until dark red marks formed. The cold metal clicked shut, locking a federal prosecutor in chains on a public street. Bradley spun David around and shoved him toward the patrol car parked at the curb. People walking by stopped to look, whispering to one another as they watched a sharply dressed man being pushed along in cuffs. David kept his head high and his posture straight, refusing to show shame for a crime he did not commit. Bradley opened the rear door of the police car and roughly forced David into the back seat. David had to bend his tall frame awkwardly to fit inside while his hands were pinned tightly behind his back. Bradley slammed the door shut, locking David in the back behind a thick plastic divider. Stepping into the driver's seat, Bradley pulled away from the curb, feeling a huge wave of pride. He grabbed his radio microphone and clicked the button. "Dispatch, Unit 2 Baker 12, Bradley announced, boasting over the air. "I am en route to the station with one adult male in custody. I just caught a guy with a fake federal ID loitering around the courthouse with stolen documents." From the back seat, David sat in silence. He looked out the tinted window as the city streets slid by, silently recording every detail in his trained legal mind. Bradley thought he had just won a big battle, but he was actually driving himself straight into a professional disaster. The patrol car pulled into the precinct's sally port 10 minutes later. Officer Bradley got out, opened the rear door, and pulled David out by his arm. David's hands were still tightly cuffed behind his back, and his suit jacket was wrinkled from the ride, but he walked into the building with his head held high. Bradley strutted through the back doors and into the busy booking area, puffing out his chest so his fellow officers could see his latest arrest. "Got a big one for booking," Bradley announced proudly to the room, pushing David toward the processing counter. Sitting at the main desk was Captain Thomas Miller, a 28-year veteran who was running the day shift. Captain Miller was typing on his computer, but when he heard Bradley's loud voice, he looked up over his reading glasses. The moment Captain Miller's eyes landed on the man in handcuffs, he stopped dead in his tracks. His jaw dropped and his face turned completely white. Captain Miller did not see a suspect. He recognized David Vance immediately. Just 6 months ago, Captain Miller and David had worked side by side on a major multi-agency federal task force targeting organized crime. Captain Miller stood up so fast his chair rolled back and hit the...
Bradley! What in God's name are you doing?
Caught this guy loitering by the Federal building, Captain. Completely blind to the tension in the room. He had a fake Federal badge and a folder full of stolen docs.
Captain Miller ignored Bradley entirely. He stepped around the counter, reached into the plastic property bag on the desk, and picked up David's leather folder. He flipped it open. The gold Department of Justice seal caught the fluorescent lights, right next to David's official photograph and Federal Prosecutor credentials. Captain Miller looked from the badge to David, then turned toward Bradley with pure rage in his eyes.
You utter fool, Captain Miller barked, his voice echoing across the silent booking room. This is David Vance. He is a Senior Assistant United States Attorney. He leads federal prosecutions for this entire district.
Bradley fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking so violently he dropped them twice before finally unlocking the steel cuffs. David rubbed his wrists, where deep red lines had formed against his skin. Bradley stood in the center of the room, staring in horror as he realized his power trip had just destroyed his career. The state board responsible for police standards permanently revoked his peace officer certification, meaning he could never work in law enforcement again. To ensure he could never testify in court or serve in public trust, prosecutors placed Bradley on the official Brady list, labeling him as a law enforcement officer with a documented history of dishonesty. His short law enforcement career was completely over. 4 weeks after the incident, David filed a federal civil rights lawsuit under Section 1983 against Officer Bradley and the city. The court filing detailed the unlawful stop, the excessive force, the false arrest, and the violation of his Fourth Amendment rights. The city's legal defense team took one look at the body camera video and advised the mayor to avoid a public jury trial at all costs. They knew no jury in the country would side with an arrogant officer who arrested a federal prosecutor on a public bench. Settlement talks moved with remarkable speed. Just 6 weeks after the lawsuit was filed, the city agreed to pay a $2.1 million settlement. It was one of the fastest financial settlements in the city's history, signaling a total admission that the officer's actions were indefensible. Winning the settlement and seeing the officer fired brought legal justice, but the personal toll was not so easy to erase. In interviews following the case, David spoke openly about the deep psychological shock of the experience. Despite his high professional rank, his years of public service, and his deep knowledge of the law, he had been handcuffed and treated like a criminal on a public street. For months after the incident, the sound of police sirens or the sight of flashing red and blue lights brought back a sharp feeling of anxiety. It was a painful reminder that titles and credentials do not always protect a person when an authority figure chooses to abuse power. However, David refused to let his story end as a personal trauma. He decided to turn the experience into a lasting structural legacy. David took the entire $2.1 million settlement and used it to establish the Vance Justice Initiative. This new regional legal defense fund was designed to provide free, high-quality legal representation to everyday citizens who had been victimized by unlawful, pretextual police stops. David realized that while he had the legal knowledge and resources to fight back, many ordinary people did not. By using the city's own payout money, he created a powerful shield to protect the rights of community members who could not afford top defense attorneys. The impact of the case extended far beyond the courtroom and into the police department itself. Prompted by the public fallout, the Municipal Oversight Committee mandated a total overhaul of police training protocols. The department introduced a mandatory retraining module focused strictly on Fourth Amendment law, proper detention standards, and recognizing valid identification. The body camera footage of Officer Bradley ignoring David's credentials and making a false arrest became the primary instructional video used in the academy. Every new recruit and veteran officer was required to watch the footage frame by frame to learn what happens when arrogance replaces proper procedure. David had transformed an unjust power trip into a powerful movement for systemic accountability and change. The story of David Vance and Officer Bradley leaves us with a critical lesson about power and justice. When a law enforcement officer acts on ego instead of evidence, authority quickly turns into tyranny. Badges are meant to represent protection and public service, but without strict accountability, they can easily be used to abuse innocent people. In this case, the true hero was not just legal knowledge, but the unyielding truth recorded by modern technology. High-definition body camera footage acts as the ultimate objective equalizer. It ensures that when someone in power lies, the truth remains preserved, frame by frame, so justice can finally be served. This story forces all of us to sit with a deeply disturbing question. If a senior federal prosecutor carrying an official Department of Justice badge and a court brief can get unlawfully cuffed on a public street, what chance does an average citizen stand when facing an aggressive officer? Do you think the $2 million settlement and the officer losing his job was enough justice, or should Bradley have faced criminal charges for his actions? Drop your honest thoughts in the comments section below. This is an important conversation, and every perspective matters. Here on this channel, we are dedicated to bringing you real, deeply researched stories about justice, accountability, and the law. We tell these stories carefully and completely, without hype or shortcuts, so you can understand not just what happened, but why it happened, and how systems must change. If this story moved you or made you think about your own rights, please take a second to hit that like button. If you have not already, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next detailed breakdown. Thank you for watching, stay safe, and always know your rights.